welcome you back to the first in a series of forums featuring the candidates for mayor in 5 Western Mass communities. We begin in Westfield, where two-term incumbent Daniel Knapik is challenged by Michael Roeder. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us tonight. It's good to have you here. We've got a quick amount of time. Quickly, let's, Mr. Roeder, start with you. Give me your assessment of the state of the city of Westfield.
Well, I think my assessment is directly related to the literally thousands of people I've talked to since I announced in April. The key elements are taxes, borrowing, and spending. These three things come up often in any political race, but they're absolutely key to this city right now. Our taxes are increasing every year. We are spending huge amounts of money, especially on infrastructure, and I'm not opposed per se to that. But the pace is just got a lot of people worried because the economy that we live in right now is not good, and people are worried. And high taxes, heavy spending, and unparalleled borrowing are just not acceptable right now.
All right, so you don't think it's in good shape. Mayor Knapik?
Well, what I'd ask my opponent is which building would he have preferred we didn't fix? You know, I talked very candidly about the problems our infrastructure had. We had school buildings where the ceiling tiles were collapsing into the classrooms. Every single roof in the city leaked. City Hall's attic almost collapsed. It was so decrepit. The fact of the matter is that the city for many years didn't have its eye on the ball about building maintenance. So we had an assessment done in January 2010 from an architectural firm, and none of the options were great. And the reality is certain decisions had to be made. But what I find very interesting is our debt burden on an annual basis in 2002, when the budget was much less than it is today, was $8.5 million a year. Today, that number is $6.5 million. So Mr. Roeder talks about this incredible growth in spending, and the reality is our debt burden as an annual percentage of our budget has gone down, and our budget is actually larger today than it was just a decade ago. The reality, though, is we've fixed our school buildings. You know, for the first time in a decade, Westfield High School can breathe again because none of the air handlers worked. Voc Tech, there was an extra $1 million in damage of that building from deferred maintenance. And you know, and I wish that wasn't the situation. You know, I talked about we were borrowing fire trucks from other cities because we had let our fire department equipment age out. And that was the reality of 4 years ago when I came in office, that all of these things needed to be addressed, and they needed to be addressed quickly.
Let's talk about property taxes. In this day and age, and I mean, we see it all across the board in smaller towns and in cities like Westfield, too, that you're getting less and less money from the state. What are you going to do other than raise property taxes? What can you do?
Well, I find that's a great question. If you go to the outlying towns, with the exception of Southwick, there's been a big property tax reduction in West Springfield in the last year. The Chicopee mayor just announced he's not raising property taxes again this year and plans to put $2.5 million into the stabilization account. Springfield had a property tax reduction last year. We have not had a property tax reduction in Westfield ever since I moved back, which was only going back to 2006. So every year our taxes have gone up. I can show the mayor my bills. The issue is really putting a stop to the increases. And I think it's possible, but to do that, we have to, accepting your argument that the state is giving us less and less, we have to make some hard decisions on what we're not going to spend. And that kind of decision is not being made by this administration. There are $100 million of new projects in the pipeline right now in this city, where we owe $100 million in bond debt. Over the last 5 years, we paid $40 million in principal and interest on our debt, and we still owe $100 million. There has to be a limit to this.
In reality, Mike's wrong with the numbers again. There's actually $65 million of general levy debt that's on the table now. Utility debt is an entirely different thing. As you know, we carry the Westfield Gas and Electric debt and the Water and Sewer Department debt. That's completely different. And as I demonstrated in the debate we had on WGBY last week, there isn't $100 million coming down the pipeline. The reality is the city of Westfield is $4.5 million in less in state aid than it is today. And actually, I would check West Springfield's facts. It wasn't like it was a dramatic tax reduction. It was a few pennies off the 1,000, which doesn't add up to an awful lot. The reality is I've been very fair. Every city, particularly the ones that are more impoverished by free and reduced costs to their school population, they get much more Chapter 70 aid than Westfield has. In fact, our Chapter 70 aid last year from the Commonwealth only went up about $300,000. that wasn't even enough to carry the cost of the step increases for our teachers' salaries based on a collective bargaining. So to compare Chicopee and Springfield with Westfield is completely different. Cities like Westfield are in this area that we're not as impoverished as some of our neighbors, so Chapter 70 money isn't rolling into the city, but it's not as well-to-do as some of our other neighbors like Agawam, and the reality is we're stuck in the middle. So what I've tried to do, and Mr. Roeder should be ready to answer this, and I haven't levied the 2.5% since my very first year in office. The 2.5%, if you go to that, it's about $2.5 million worth of new income. He says he's not going to have any levy increases. He needs to be prepared then to say if fixed costs in the budget go up almost $2 million per year, what's going to be the layoff consequences? Because 85% of our budget is in salaries. And the council tried to cut $1 million in June, and it was going to be 6 police officers, 2 or 3 firefighters, and 15 teachers. So if you're sitting here saying you're not going to levy, it's going to be triple those numbers.
So we'll give you 30 because we've got to go to a break, but go ahead.
Well, since 2010, I happen to have these figures here. I thought this would come up. To the present time, there are several councilmen right here. I'm not going to name names, okay? One of them, his taxes over the last 4 years have gone up 19.36%, another 19.36%, another 21.03%. We have had tax increases based on the manipulation of the structure, the business to residential tax shift, and other methods that are legally used. And these are the kind of tax increases that have occurred.
Can I quickly ask a question on that? Yeah. Is the assessment of their properties gone up? Is that why the taxes have gone up?
That's the tax shift. And what I would say, I sat on the council for 8 years. There really hasn't been a voice on the city council about the residential tax shift. And I really think the council in the last few years has taken the shift that's available to us and swung it more to a burden for the residences than they have with the businesses. And, you know, and that's really what the crux of the issue is, because if they swung the levy split more towards the residences, you wouldn't see a dramatic increase like that. But the reality is, over the last few years, we have lost all the voices typically on the council for residential tax relief. And so I've used, in real dollars, over $1 million+ to help buffer that by only levying to 1.5% over the last 2 years. And the reality is and again, you know, the budget in real numbers has only gone up on average over the last 4 years about 2% per year. And in the same time, we have to pay our people. We've had contract agreements that are on the table. And it's not like, you know, you make decisions in the vacuum where you can't pay your people. And that's really the reality. You have bills due, and that's the cost. In Westfield, if I had $1.5 million more Chapter 70 money for schools than what was available in 2010, we'd be in a lot better condition over there. And if we had $2.5 million more for general lottery aid that we had in 2010, we'd be in a lot different condition. The reality is we have more money in stabilization. We are expecting $3 million in free cash. We have the highest short-term bond rating. We have the best credit rating the city's had in decades. And we've taken care of an enormous backlog of deferred maintenance and deferred capital equipment.
Right, hey, we've got to take a break, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Back now, continuing our talk with Mayor Daniel Knapik and his challenger, Michael Roeder. Mr. Roeder, what would you do for the city of Westfield that the current mayor isn't doing? We've got about a minute.
Well, I absolutely put a clamp on spending. I would take a look real hard at future hires. I would take a look at consultants, the costs. I take a look at everyday expenses. I take a look at out-of-state travel. I would take a look at every line item on this budget and make some really, really tough decisions in terms of our future. And I think my goal, which many people endorse, about not raising taxes next year, fiscal year 2015, which starts July 1st of 2014, is an achievable goal without laying one person off. And part of that picture is an absolute restriction on future borrowing, with the exception of the senior center. And I cannot come to terms with the figures for that yet, but I hope I will be able to, because it's deserved. And absolutely watch every dollar that goes out the door.
All right, Mayor Knapik.
Well, you know, like I said, I think if you're sitting there talking to the taxpayers tonight and saying you will not levy today and you don't know what your state aid is going to be, you don't know what your revenue sources are going to be, it's a fool's promise. And you know, and I've said very honestly, we'll take a look at every year as it is. And then two out of the last 3 years, when we went to finalize the entire budget process in November, when we set the tax rate, we've given money back to the taxpayers. I'm not going to make a promise I know I can't deliver on, And like I said before, when 85% of your budget is in personnel and you have $2 million worth of fixed costs like insurance and utilities, and then you have a contracts on top of that we're settling now, there is absolutely no way Mr. Roeder could absolutely look in the camera and say, I'm going to not tax you at any level. That's just not, that's, like I said, that's a fool's promise.
I don't envy either one of you, whoever's elected mayor on November 5th. Gentlemen, thanks. My thanks to Mayor Daniel Knapik and Michael Roeder for taking the time to be with us tonight. Now, in